Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you all to McKean County, and thank you very much for coming today. I'd like to call this meeting of the House Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee to order, and I do thank all of you for coming. I'd like to start out by asking the members to introduce themselves, and we'll start to my right with Representative Zimmerman.
Northeast part of, sorry about that, 99th District, northeast part of Lancaster County.
Chris Dush, the 66th District, Jefferson County, and the northern half of Indiana County.
Good morning, everyone. Representative Dan Mal from Adams County. We are a border county to Maryland, where it is much warmer than it is here.
Good morning, I'm Representative Kate Klunk. I represent the 169th District in southern York County.
Good morning, I'm Representative Mark Keller. I represent the 86th District, which is all of Perry and part of Cumberland County, and the home of Tuscarora Hardwoods.
Representative Marty Causer, I represent McKean, Potter, and Cameron counties, and glad to be the host for today's meeting.
Good morning, Representative Eddie Day-Pashinsky, Luzerne County.
Good morning, John Lawrence, southwestern Chester County and a part of Lancaster County.
Representative Mark Gillen from Berks and Lancaster counties. I came here with my daughter, Gloria, who's in the back. And she asked how many time zones we came through to get up here. Was that 2 or 3?
Good morning, Tommy Sankey, Clearfield, and a little bit of Cambria County.
Good morning, Stephen Bloom from the central part of Cumberland County, the 199th District.
I'm Rick Roush. I'm the Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences at Penn State.
Good morning, Representative Brad Roy. I represent parts of Crawford County and parts of Erie County.
Mark Adams, District Director for Senator Joe Scarnati, 25th Senatorial District.
We're certainly glad to have this many members north of Interstate 80. It's a great feeling. So, I also want to welcome Peter Winkler with Congressman Thompson's office. Peter, you're welcome to join us up here if you'd like. Appreciate you joining us today. The Congressman's certainly a strong advocate for the forest products industry. But I do want to thank everybody for coming today. And now we'll turn to the introductions for the members of the panel that are here. I want to start with Secretary Redding.
Yeah, Russell Redding, Secretary of Agriculture.
Good morning, I'm Dave Gustafson. I am the Forestry Program Manager for the Pennsylvania Game Commission.
Peter Winkler, and I was just introduced. I'm District Director for Congressman Thompson's office. Thank you, by the way, Marty.
And Wayne Bender, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Hardwoods Development Council within the Department of Agriculture.
I'm Susan Swanson, the Director of the Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group.
My name is Tom Case. I'm the Land Manager for Collins Kane Hardwood.
Ken Kane, President, Generations Forestry, Consulting Forestry Company in Kane, Pennsylvania.
Good morning, I'm John Norbeck, DCNR's Deputy Secretary for Parks and Forestry.
Head of the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management within the College of Agricultural Sciences at Penn State.
I guess I got here just in time to introduce myself. I'm Representative Kathy Rapp, and I represent Warren, Forest, and parts of Crawford counties.
Thank you all very much. I don't think we've missed anyone, so we've got an impressive group here today. And I thank all of you for coming. The topic of our meeting today is the Pennsylvania forest products industry, and where else better to discuss forest products than in the northern tier of Pennsylvania. So we've pulled this meeting together to talk about forest products and to talk about the status of the industry, to talk about challenges that the industry faces, and to really have an interactive roundtable discussion about those challenges as we as policymakers look to make decisions to help the forest products industry. So we all know how important our agriculture industry is. We all know that it's our #1 industry, but people often don't realize that the forest products industry is an important sector of our agriculture industry. And it's certainly important part of the economy of northwestern Pennsylvania and the northern tier, but it's also an important sector of our economy throughout the Commonwealth. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today, and at this point I'd like to turn to Secretary Redding for some opening comments.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chairman Paszynski, thank you. Members of the committee and industry, really appreciate the opportunity to come to McKean County and be part of the conversation, but more importantly, just to see such a strong turnout and great response from the industry here that many times we speak of and we reference, but we don't get a chance to really meet and see, right? And by this outreach here, we get a chance to do that. So a couple of comments, and I thought about this after last night's gathering and had a chance to visit a bit and reflected on Ken's comments. A couple of thoughts. One is, we are incredibly blessed in the Commonwealth from a diversity standpoint of agriculture, right? I mean, you fly over it, you drive over it, you look around, and that diversity is really our strength, both in terms of what we produce, the infrastructure we have, the people, the regions, and the forest products is a really key part of that. We have also, as we looked at last night's conversation, there were two things that stood out. One was this issue of the definition of agriculture. And as a secretary, we just sort of assume all of these different components are part of that. And what you realize that society doesn't normally put agriculture or forestry in the column of agriculture, right? We think we know it is, it should be. But I think that whole definition conversation is one that's important for us as we talk about what is the agricultural economy in the state, making sure that we continually and consistently reference the forest products industry as being a key part of that, as we would with dairy, as we would with livestock. And some of that is historical. I mean, because of the way data is collected, over time, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's definition of ag doesn't include things that are unique to Pennsylvania. But I think for us as a department, we certainly want to make sure that the forest products industry is in that definition. We've taken that approach with our strategic plan effort, but with Ken sort of raising that last night, and then Chairman, you as well, I think that's a point of discussion, is how do we integrate that, the forest products industry, into our definition in the narrative about what is agriculture in Pennsylvania. It is the leading agricultural export from Pennsylvania, is hardwoods, right? It's not the beef cattle and the snack foods and all the other things that we point to. It's actually hardwoods. The second point that stood out last night was the workforce, both in terms of the attracting the current immediate need of a workforce, but also the aspirational side of that, right? How do you have folks aspire to be part of this industry and recognize that it's a place with meaningful employment opportunities for our youth and that whole new generation that's going to take its place here. So a couple of thoughts there. The final point would be, I know many of you have the Green Ribbon report that was commissioned by the governor, and others can speak to that, but this meeting today I think is particularly well timed because of the content of that report. You have folks at the table and in the room who were part of the of the work to really get to the set of recommendations, and it captures that that whole sort of spectrum of the economic benefits, but also the natural resource benefits of the forest products industry. And what do we do as a Commonwealth about that? How do we guide our work? And credit to Secretary Dunn and DCNR and my colleague Secretary Davitt and DCED did a lot of good work on that. And we know, just by way of the Hardwood Development Council being part of the Department of Ag, very proud of that, the work of the council, the efforts of the council, and I've shared this privately with some of you, having watched this over time, knowing what happened to the industry in 2008, 2009, and then stepping away for a while and coming back. I was absolutely amazed, at the transformation that has occurred in that industry. And the resilience of the industry speaks to the people who are in it and the work that they do. But it's a different industry today, not fully recovered. But when you look at how severe the collapse of the housing industry and the international and domestic markets were, and how brutal that was, in some cases remains, to have an industry that's here today in the size and shape and the people in it, I think we can all be very proud of what they have done and what they offer. So a lot of that credit goes to them, of course, and the work of the hardwood utilization groups and the Hardwood Development Council. So with that, look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your comments. And I think that the Governor's Green Ribbon Commission report is certainly a good foundation of recommendations for us to consider as we move forward. And I know many people sitting around this table were part of that commission, so it makes a good foundation to look at specific issues that we as policymakers need to take a look at. So appreciate your comments very much. A gentleman that helped us put this meeting together, Mr. Ken Kane from Generations Forestry. I appreciate all the work that you did to help put this together, and now would turn to you for some opening comments also.
Well, thank you very much for all of you coming up here. Fortunately, we had a brief opportunity last night to meet and interact a little bit, and I think my comments last night can carry over to this morning. And we're just really excited that you would come up to McKean County, to the 67th legislative district, because this is truly a big part of the heart of Pennsylvania and what Pennsylvania is agriculturally. As Secretary Redding mentioned, oftentimes our forest products industry is not looked at as agriculture. It's just that our crop takes 100 years to grow instead of a farmer's dairy corn crop 100 days. And I think we got that point across last night, and I'm glad that kind of hit home, because what can happen in 100 years on a forest has a lot of impacts, and we need a lot of tending. And as difficult as it is to get farm workers, it's equally as difficult to get people working in the forest products industry, because it's a difficult industry. And if I could make a correlation to the forest products industry to farming, is how many of us know a dairy farmer? And you don't know many people that are 30 years old and borrow a couple $1 million to go into dairy farming. If they didn't grow up in dairy farming, they're not dairy farmers, because it's instilled in a youthful age. And that's very much the forest products industry. We have hurdles that allow people in the forest products industry to reach out to younger people, to get them interested in the woods at a time that is important. And that is the formidable years. And the way the industry is structured, we really legally can't get people out there before they're 18 years of age. And at that point, they've already have a direction. So the forest products industry needs the opportunity to engage our youth at a younger age, to show them what it can be and what they can do, because it's an extremely rewarding career. This is a dangerous job, you betcha, but so's farming. And so we need to correlate and continue to build the bridge between forestry and farming, because it is all agriculture. We just have to look at it differently. The other aspect that I'd like to drive home with you, or give you the opportunity to take home, is Deputy Secretary Norbeck brought me some copies of the Green Ribbon Task Force publication, the final document. And I'd like to share that with you, and we pass them around, that each of you could take one and have it, another copy, if you will, to look through to see what came out of that very intense, time-consuming commitment of people within the industry of things that we could do in Pennsylvania. Because we know when you leave here today, we're so glad you're here, but when you leave here today, there's a myriad of issues that you have to address moving forward. One of them is the budget next week. But I really believe there's things in that document that we can do that may enhance revenue to the Commonwealth and not necessarily be a budgetary drag if we look at it creatively. And the people that served on that are some pretty forward-thinking, creative people. And we need to continue to educate our public about issues. The 67th District also is the head of the watersheds. And I mentioned that last night, that we are the head of 3 watersheds. It's very important to the overall agricultural program of our Commonwealth. But the other thing that we have at the top of the watershed are some invasive species that tend to migrate downstream, and you folks have them downstream that they migrate up. And I think there's opportunity for us all to address that in a creative way that maybe is not as cost-consuming as it is in other places. I mean, there's other states that spend tens of millions of dollars to address invasives, but yet here in Pennsylvania, our Department of Agriculture is a leading department of a state agency within the nation of protecting our Commonwealth and our country against invasives. So I think there's an opportunity to address that as well. And also the practices of forestry, having us foresters that have a passion for the forest to use creative thinking and allow you to be creative in your legislation that gives us more tools moving forward. One of the things we're going to see later today in our tour is 30 years of mitigating the deer population and what we had to do 30 years ago. But yet, with the deer population in balance with its habitat today, and creating a habitat that could allow that population to explode again, having the tools to maintain that population in balance with its habitat, because as the Secretary mentioned, forest products industry is still a depressed industry. We don't have the revenues that we had in the 90s to use some of the tools that were available to us. So there's all of those issues that we can discuss today, and 2.5 hours is going to sound like a lot of time, but it'll be amazing how fast that time passes with the issues at hand. And the collaboration between agencies, just last week, a week ago tomorrow, Dave Gustafson brought some of his staff up where we actually, through a public agency, the Game Commission, our company, we went out on the landscape and talked about different tools, different tactics, different silvicultural procedures that we can use to make our forest a healthier forest. Because again, going back to what we'll see in the tour today, we'll see over 30 years of impact from the beach scale Nectria complex. We'll see that on one landowner, one small 12,000 acre landowner, and that's small when you talk about DCNR of 2.2 million acres and the Game Commission at 2 million, 2.1. I mean, so that 12,000 acres seems small for that. But to put that in comparison, the little town of Bradford, that great glass of water you're drinking, some of the highest quality water that you can get in the Commonwealth, in the past 5 years has harvested 1,900 acres of ash infested with the emerald ash borer. On that 1,900 acres, 2.8 million board feet of ash was harvested, generating for the city over 5 years about $1.4 million. For a small rural community, that's significant. And there are opportunities out there to be creative in that, and we're going to see that this afternoon. So again, we welcome you, and hopefully this meeting is a taste of interest in this industry so that later this month you'll all find the opportunity to come back up to the northern tier to the Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group's annual meeting, where we could maybe put together a more detailed tour of things you find interest in today that we could show you in more detail at that date and maybe talk about it then and welcome you back to this area again, because I tell people that come to this part of Pennsylvania that we live in the best kept secret east of the Mississippi. I don't want everybody to know that. We'll lose it. But I'd like the right 100 people to figure it out to increase our quality of life. So again, thanks for coming, and we look forward to this dialogue this morning. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Ken. Appreciate your comments very much. And I'll tell you, we've got an impressive panel assembled here. And I have a feeling, Ken, you're going to get a few questions today. So looking forward to that. We also have with us Deputy Secretary Norbeck from DCNR, and as a significant landholder in the Commonwealth, I'd like to open it up to you for some opening comments.
Thank you very much for having the opportunity to be here. I will talk a little bit about the land management in DCNR.
Hold the mic just a little bit closer.
Talk a little bit about the land management within DCNR. We have about 2.2 million acres of state forest land and about 300,000 acres of state park land. The state forest lands, we really do manage it for a multi-purpose opportunities for Pennsylvanians. So we do forest products, certainly. As Ken Kane said, we harvest it in a sustainable way. We target, I say 15,000 acres a year, but I think it's 14,788 acres. But we generally do 15,000 acres a year regardless of what the market bears. What we're trying to do really is to manage the forest sustainably. I think that folks in the forest products industry hopefully noticed that during the Great Recession, when a number of folks were not selling their timber, the Commonwealth was continuing to sell at that around 15,000 acre a year, which I think helped keep some operators still operating, which was a great benefit to the Commonwealth and kept things moving a little bit. We do have other opportunities on state forest lands. I mean, we manage for wildlife, we manage for other recreational opportunities, so it's a real balance. We manage for water. The Bureau of Forestry, which is part of DCNR, was really an outgrowth of our founding organization, which was the Department of Forest and Waters. And the main purpose of that at the turn of the century, the last century, was to protect the water resources. And if you remember your history, that Pennsylvania pretty much denuded all of our forests by the early 1900s, and we were having great water quality issues. So the Department of Forest and Waters was established, and we started acquiring land and reforesting those hills, and we have a great forest now that we think that over the long term we'll be able to make much more sustainable for the citizens of Pennsylvania.
Thank you very much. We're also joined by Sue Swanson with the Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group. Welcome, Sue, and appreciate any comments you're able to offer.
Thank you. I also want to thank you all for coming. It really is very impressive, and it's really nice to have Eastern legislators in the Northwest. We often talk to the choir, and so having you all here is really impressive, and we all really appreciate it. AHUG is one of the hardwood utilization groups that are scattered around the state. We represent 14 counties in the northwest and north central part of the state. We receive a considerable amount of funding through the Hardwood Development Council and the Department of Ag. So again, we all appreciate the support that you've given us in the past. Hopefully we'll get it in the future. But a couple things, I'm maybe a little repetitive, but it has been brought up before. There are issues facing our industry, and it is in an incline from the depressive position it was in a few years ago. So we're looking to help stabilize that. Workman's compensation for loggers is one of our biggest issues, and it has been for a long time. But now it's making it almost impossible for us to grow our logging force. When you have to pay 54 cents on every dollar that you make, it's really hard to employ people. So my organization and some others have looked into, you know, the whole thing. And I've learned a whole lot about things like multipliers and cost benefits and things like that I never really knew very much about. I think how some of those things were raised in the Green Ribbon Commission will be really helpful to help us address them. So I look forward to working with the legislator, but also some of our agencies to do that. The other thing, and Ken's mentioned it, Secretary Redding's mentioned it, is youth, getting our youth involved in this industry. Generally, like farming, they come up through the family. But if we could, bring those young people into our industry at an early age, that would be really helpful. I know Congressman Thompson has worked on some federal legislation that would allow that. So having that support and interaction is important. The other thing that I think is really important is to create a climate where businesses can thrive. Secretary Redding mentioned our exports. The Hardwood Development Council has really taken a strong position to help our industry to develop international markets. We also continue to develop domestic markets. That's important as well. But some of those things are things that I think we can all work on. It's going to be really interesting to see, to have you out on the landscape, talk about different management techniques and things like that. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and there's nothing that I personally enjoy more than taking people that don't know a lot about forest management out in the forest and showing them what that is and what that benefits. So I welcome you again, and I'm really, really appreciative of the opportunity that we have here today.
Thank you, Sue. One thing that I failed to mention, the members here are members, many of them members of the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, but also we've been joined by members of the Legislative Timber Caucus. We actually have a caucus of members that members choose to join the caucus because they're interested in forest products issues. So several members of the Timber Caucus are here with us today. And in addition, Representative Rapp and Senator Hutchinson serve on the Hardwood Development Council as board members. So they're actively involved in forestry issues. So we have a pretty great group here this morning. With that said, Wayne Bender is the Executive Director of the Hardwood Development Council. Appreciate you making the trip here today and would offer you the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here again. You live in Penn's Woods. We're the only state named for its forest, and we really enjoy teaching through our Woodmobile and our programs that we have, making sure that every citizen knows that they are living in Penn's Woods and that they have an interest in the forest resource. All of you have come here thinking because, in general, the population of Pennsylvania thinks the Northwest and North Central Pennsylvania is where the heart of the forest products industry is. You may be surprised to find that that's where the forest resource is, but the jobs that depend on that forest resource, the #1 county is Lancaster. #2 is York. #3, Montgomery. #4, Philadelphia. Surprise, surprise. This is a statewide issue for the importance of the forest products industry, because if you don't have the forest resource, it's going to impact the jobs that are in the Southeast. And so we're very much a whole state issue. It's not just a regional issue or just a particular party issue. It's an issue that affects all of us. I've been very fortunate to work for the Hardwoods Development Council for the past 17 years. I was hired initially to develop a public education and to be able to tell the story of the forest products industry through the Woodmobile. And I've developed that program, and we've had over 160,000 students and 1.6 million visitors in the Woodmobile sharing that story. But the story is beyond that, and I think probably one of the most significant aspects of the work that I've done in the past, and Sue has mentioned it already, is that back in 2000 when I was hired, we exported about $280 million worth of lumber. And shortly after, and I was told when I was interviewed, You may want to get a passport, but probably you won't be doing international marketing. That'll be somebody else, if anybody. Your focus will be education. Well, about that same time that I was hired, the furniture industry left our country and moved to the Pacific Rim nations. And because of the programs that we had available through DCD and the World Trade Center there and our international trade offices, we helped over 100 companies move into the export market, especially on the Pacific Rim nations. I will be returning to China for the first time in 4 or 5 years, having made about 10 trips to China, taking with me 3, 5, 10 companies at a time to do their export market. If it weren't for our exports today, 40% of our market last year, or excuse me, 40% of our market exports went to China alone last year. Another 25% went to Canada, and 10% went to Mexico. That's 75% of our markets into 3 particular markets. And the Hardwoods Council has been very involved in 2 of those markets. Our industry doesn't need help exporting to Canada. They've done that all along on their own. But they certainly needed our help in Mexico as well as in China. That market is critical to the success of the industry. And today, the values of the forest resource here is no longer connected to the housing market in the United States. But we can show you the statistics that the value of the forest resource is directly proportional to the sales of the market to China alone. It's the emerging middle class of China that's driving the market and the value of our forest resource. And because we had a Hardwoods Development Council that was committed to that, our industry is well situated in the international market. Our brand, Pennsylvania Hardwood Stands for Quality, is known all over the world. And when I go to trade shows, or our companies go to the trade shows internationally, and they show that logo, companies come up to them and say, I want to buy from you. That's where the quality wood is. And we are successful, and we are the #1 supplier of the forest products for the export market. That's because you've had a Hardwood Council that's been responsive to the issues and to the programs that are available. We're very much concerned in those 3 markets as to what the future holds. The National Hardwood Lumber Association, the American Hardwood Export Council, are all very anxious about what the next few months, years may impact as those export markets become maybe questionable with issues that are affecting our national government and leadership. And so if anything changes in the markets, just last week there were tariffs imposed on Canada on logs that are being brought into our country from Canada. We ship a lot of logs and lumber to Canada. What happens when tariffs are imposed in retrospect? And of course, Mexico, there are issues, and China. So the Hardwood Council has its work cut out for the future as we strive to deal with these issues and try to continue to keep our industry very competitive. I really look forward to the challenges. That's just one of the many challenges that we have, but I, again, appreciate this opportunity to help you understand that the forest products industry is a statewide issue, not just the Northwest, but it's something that really impacts our economy as well as the quality of life for all of us. I like to say that Pennsylvania Hardwoods quality, our logo is Pennsylvania Hardwoods Stand for Quality. But the quality of our lives here in Pennsylvania relates to the value of our forest as well, for the watershed protection, for the recreation, for the wildlife habitat. All of that affects our lives as well. And Pennsylvania leads in sustainable forestry. Our industry is extremely aware of the concerns, and the wood products industry is the greenest environment, or greenest building product to use. And so our job is to make sure we're using the forest resource wisely and making sure we're keeping the rural areas of our state employed, as well as the resource for other areas of our state. Thank you again, and I look forward to talking with you more.
Thank you, Wayne. We appreciate your expertise, and I think you're making a great point that this really is a statewide economic issue and benefits every single county in Pennsylvania. So that's a great point. We also have with us Tom Case, land manager from Collins Hardwood in Kane, and they're a significant landholder in the Commonwealth, and would turn to Tom for any opening comments.
Thank you, Marty. Welcome to Pennsylvania Wilds. For those of you who haven't been up here to visit us, it's a beautiful part of the state. I feel very fortunate to live up here. The Collins story is a long-lived one. We're in the 5th generation of a family-owned forest products company. Started in Forest County, just a little bit south and west of here in 1855. The owners currently live out west, but they still have a 118,000-acre forest here in Pennsylvania, which myself and the rest of the staff are charged with managing for them. It's been in the Forest Stewardship Council certified program since 1995. So here we are 22 years into it's a third-party, independent third party that certifies our forest as being sustainable. So we're in this for the long haul. We're not a fly-by-night company that, 5 years from now we're going to be in China. That's not the history of our company. We've been here for 162 years now. So that's pretty proud heritage that I get to represent as an employee. I guess to tie in with some of Ken's comments with our workforce, and to Sue's comment with workers' comp, I think those two really tie together. It's very hard to convince young, talented people maybe to follow in their parents' footsteps when they see that they have to pay 54 cents on the dollar just to be insured to do their job. I mean, what other industries out there have those types of restrictions for encouraging young people to come and join that workforce? So that's a huge issue. And I think, the contrast that I see is here we sit just a few miles from the New York State border, and you go to New York State, their forest workers are paying about half the rate of our Pennsylvania forest product workers. And I'm hoping that some of our smart representatives that we have can help figure out this problem and bring us to a more equitable level of what our neighbors to the north are paying. I think that would be a huge accomplishment if we could work towards a goal like that. I think one of the other things we see in our region is, yes, we have this wonderful timber basket that we live in. A lot of it is public lands, state lands, game lands. But at some point, enough's enough. That impacts our local tax bases. One of the other hats I wear is I'm a borough councilman in Kane. I think it's important to have public land and public space, but maybe some of those new investments should be focused more towards regions that don't have so much public land and public space, where you have larger population centers that could enjoy that. So maybe we should be trying to focus any new acquisitions in the Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Allentown, those types of areas, Scranton, that they might have less of that available. So rather than using, state resources to put more in places where we already have a quite robust representation of that, let's look to other areas of the state where it might make more sense. And I think another thing we'll be talking about throughout the day is, the Clean and Green program is something that, we as a large landowner, we appreciate having that as a tool to help us reduce our tax burden. Any tool can be improved, I guess, so we'd be looking to maybe have some improvements to that as well. But I welcome you all to this part of the state. Like Sue said, I think it's great to get people out and see what we as forest managers do, not just for our area, our local people, but for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and just the nation as a whole. I think our Pennsylvania hardwood industry makes a huge contribution, and Wayne, I was really impressed with some of those facts you put out there. I did not realize Lancaster was the #1 county. So thanks for, I always like to learn something new every day. So I learned something new already today. So thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of today.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate you being here today. And you hit on a number of issues that we need to further discuss, and certainly the workers' compensation one is huge. And being in an area that borders New York State, I hear from people constantly on how the workers' compensation issue is, and I certainly don't like it when they tell me New York State's better than us on anything, to be honest with you, because it's usually never the case. So we need to formulate a solution to that issue, because I mean, even going into the grocery store, folks walk up to me and say, we've got one logging crew out there. If you'd fix this workers' compensation issue, we'd have 2 or 3 logging crews. So, I mean, it's significant, and we need to formulate a solution to that. And I think you're probably going to get some more questions on that as the meeting goes along. But thank you so much for being here. We also have with us Dave Gustafson. Dave is the chief of the Forestry Division, the Bureau of Wildlife Habitat Management at the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and also a McKean County native. So welcome, Dave, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Causer and members of the committee. I very much appreciate the invite. Anytime I get an excuse to come back home to McKean County is a good day. I don't know how anybody could grow up in McKean County and not be tied to the forest resource. And all I ever wanted to do growing up as a young man was do something to make a difference for wildlife in the forests of the Commonwealth. And I now have the great privilege to serve the Pennsylvania Game Commission as their chief forester. And with that privilege comes a pretty great responsibility. We are the second largest single forest landowner in Pennsylvania. We own over 1.5 million acres of state game lands, scattered across 65 of the 67 counties. 92% of that land base is classified as forest land. So for us to achieve our objectives in managing habitat for wildlife, we have to manage the forest. I think we're in a time now where we're facing some pretty steep challenges in forest management. We've heard talk of invasive species and things like that. One of the biggest challenges, our forests are getting older and older and older. And we have the desire to achieve a distribution where we've got a higher percentage of that forest in a young age class. And if you look at a lot of our wildlife in this state that we have concern over, the decline in ruffed grouse, woodcock, even concerns for white-tailed deer, they thrive best when we have somewhere near 17% of our forest land base classified as young forest, that forest that's 20 years old or less. And right now, our state game lands are not unlike many of our other forest lands in Pennsylvania. We've got a lot of older forest and not much young forest. So that's a key focus of ours. How do we get there? How do we get more of that forest in the young forest age class? Well, we have to harvest timber. To do that, we have to have a very robust forest products industry. So we look at the forest products industry as our key partner. And as Ken Kane alluded to, we've spent a lot of time working with partners on the private side to figure out how we can do things different and better and make it easier for them to help us achieve our goals as partners. So that's a key focus for us. We have grown our program significantly in the last several years. We spent a few years investing a lot of time and money and manpower analyzing our resource base to really get a good handle on what we had available. And we have grown our program significantly, similar to Secretary Norbeck's comments about the sustainability of what we're doing to the industry. Even when the markets were down, we continued our outputs on the same level. And I think some of the industry folks counted on us for that, and we were proud to be able to work with them over time. So, our focus is wildlife. And I think when you look at forests and then wildlife and you look at the interconnectivity of those, it leads to, well, if we're managing our forests in a healthy way, that's leading to a healthy, robust forest products industry, which leads to healthy rural communities. So it's all connected. So we're very interested in being at the table, and I appreciate the invitation to be here. I also served on the Governor's Green Ribbon Task Force, so I was part of that great group of folks that came up with some great recommendations, and I think things that we've put in there set the stage for the vision of how we go forward in the future in managing our forest resource to achieve a healthy forest economy, healthy communities, healthy wildlife, and healthy habitat for the future of the Commonwealth. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with the committee, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate your participation today. We've also been joined by Dr. Richard Rausch, the Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences at Penn State University, and also Dr. Michael Messina, Head and Professor of the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management at the College of Agricultural Sciences, and certainly would open it up to you gentlemen for comments.
Mike in the end. Thank you.
And I have to say, it's great to have a Penn State dean on a Pitt campus.
We all have a big tent. You know, we all collaborate. We support fellow universities.
Fellow state-related university,
That's
right?
right. It's great to be here. This, for me, is a follow-up on a trip that we had July 12th last year that Ken helped organize and took us out, showed us various things. And we talked a lot about what the problems were facing the industry. Many of those have been talked about already. I'll focus on some where we might have some unique abilities to make some contributions. So identified on that trip were two particular problems: seed yields in black cherry, and also problems with ash borer, which we knew about, but I was challenged on that trip to see if there were things the university could be engaged in that would help keep the ash trees alive. So we followed up over the last several months. With respect to black cherry seed predation, and Ken doesn't know all this yet either probably, but in respect to black cherry seed production, one of the things that got me interested in is at Penn State we have a really strong pollination ecology group, and one of the thoughts at the time was there was a problem with pollination. So Christina Grosinger, who leads that group, got in contact with Robert Long, who's with the Forest Service in Irvine, Pennsylvania, and they started a channel of communication to try to figure out what's going on and what kinds of things to investigate. And the short end of the summary of the story is they've started looking at using lifts to get up high enough in the trees to find out what the pollinators actually are. Because at the time we were looking at honeybees, and I was looking around, saw a lot of bumblebees and said maybe it's not honeybees. So they're looking to see what the pollination really is, but Long's also discovered other things by looking at the cherries already. They're being attacked by a newly introduced pest in the United States that attacks a lot of fruit crops, the spotted winged Drosophila. And it apparently seems to be knocking off about 40% of the fruit in the black cherries. And then some of the seeds that survive are knocked off by sawflies. So they're going up in the trees, and they're trying to look to find out what the pollinators really are, but also it looks like seed herbivory is a big source of it. So they're still working on it, but an immediate suggestion from this could be that we should be looking at making localized insecticide applications post-pollination to try to better protect the seed set. You wouldn't do it through the whole forest, but if you have particular areas, Ken, that you're interested in, one might consider making insecticide applications there to fend off the Drosophila, the fruit fly, and the seed sawflies that seem to be attacking them. I mean, maybe we could get increased yield. So there's some ideas we might be able to follow up pretty quickly to look at that. With respect to ash borer, we started talking about this because Kim Steiner, who's the director of the Arboretum but is also in Mike's department, fortuitously in 1978 planted a stand over 2,000 ash trees on the Penn State campus. And a few years of those got attacked by ash borers. But as a resource, this was a unique stand. And one of those basic research things where nobody would have imagined what the eventual use will be. But because it was a very tightly packed stand, trees on a 12 by 12 grid, this is a pretty uniform stand to look at what happens with ash borer attack, unlike what you might find in a forest. Essentially what happened is that 97% of the trees died after the ash borer attack, but some have survived. And one of the most interesting things, as Kim Steiner has analyzed his data, is that the survivors originated disproportionately from a small number of wild populations, predominantly in the western parts of the native range in Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Wyoming. That, to me, is a signal that there's genetics there. It wasn't everything, and there's actually pedigrees that seem to survive. So that also led them to they've also simultaneously been tracing down and have been in communication with Jennifer Koch, who's with the Forest Service in Delaware, Ohio, who's been doing a lot of work on these lingering trees, and finds there are a number of trees that have at least some partial level of resistance. And in her email, she outlined exactly the same sort of thing I was thinking about at the time, is that you may not find individual trees that are immune, but in breeding for host plant resistant crops, we often combine genotypes from different sources to sort of stack the resistance genes against the crop. Cotton, for example, they managed to include high anthocyanin levels with high tannin levels and some other things, and gradually make cotton varieties that were more resistant to boll weevils or boll worms than others. So she's trying to apply, as I would have imagined, the same model to looking at what's happening with these trees, where you might get lingering trees from different regions might have different genes, and collectively you might be able to stack them and breed resistance. Well, it happens that already she's taken, she'd already found one surviving tree and bred it to some susceptible trees, and then got sort of collected the seed offspring. And one of the things that John Carlson, who's also in Mike's department, has been doing, he works on the genetics of this. So they've taken about 220 seedlings that Jennifer Koch produced. They're planting them out at Penn State, and they're going to grow them up and look at the genetics of them. Essentially what they're doing is for looking, after they expose them to the attack of ash borer, we'll try to look at the differences between the plants, the trees that seem to be surviving from the ones that don't in this hybrid system, and they'll be able to map what regions of the genome seem to have associations with resistance to ash borer. So that's a really powerful technique that plant breeders, crop breeders have done for a long time, because if they can get an idea of what regions seem to contribute for resistance, they can use molecular markers to help do the breeding work much faster than you can do, and more efficiently than you can do by just assaying whether the trees survive beetle attack or not, and be able to try to mix and match the genes that look like they work, combining them from different places, trying to maintain some of the local provenance so you could put the things back. So it really opens up a strong possibility of trying to look at resistance. Along the way, when we first started having meetings about this at Penn State, I recruited Gary Felton, who's the head of entomology and really leads a chemical ecology group. And two of the people in that group, Tom Baker and Jim Tumlinson, have started looking at the chemical profiles of various species of ash from around the world that differ in their degrees of resistance susceptibility to the ash borer attack. And what they find is there's a group of compounds called the phenylpropanoids that are present in the leaves and bark and appear to deter feeding by ash borers. And so what they're looking for is maybe to try to link these chemical compounds as a bioindicator of what's going on. They'll start to look and see if there's any of that happening in the trees that have already been identified. So they're linking the chemical ecology to the genetics to lingering trees. And sort of a breeding program that's quite parallel to what's been done for breeding crops resistant to insects and fungal diseases. So I think there's a lot of things that are very positive in all this and very promising. But they have made a plea. Kim Steiner in particular and John Carlson have asked that there really should be an effort. I mean, one of the things that concerned me from the start is that when people go through and harvest stands of trees that are dying off, are they actually killing the few that we need that might have genotypes for resistance? Because they take them all out at the time that it looks like some of the stand is dying. And admittedly, they only do it in place they can access, but that's one source of trees that people can find. So one of the things that they're really interested in doing is across the state, trying to get clonal orchards of surviving ash genotypes to be established, even if they have to be protected in the short term by insecticide treatments, probably by imidacloprid treatments as is standard practice, to keep the trees going, even in the face of attack, because the ones that are partially resistant provide the genotypes that you might be able to breed resistant trees in the long term, and probably at least as importantly, maintain local provenance, so that if we can find where the resistance is, we can breed it back into trees that are locally adapted and maintain the diversity of what ash has had over centuries. So a strong plea is they specifically have been inquiring about whether the Bureau of Forestry could create a system of clonal orchards for these genotypes. They've talked with Dan Devlin about this already, but I think that something that we want to try to do is push down the road the idea of trying to get some of these orchards established across the state. Certainly Penn State would be happy to host some. We've got an arboretum and so forth. But it'd probably be a good idea not put all of our eggs, as it were, in one basket, and also try to maintain the clonal diversity by having some up north and so forth. So we maintain the variation. We want to go back and tap when and if we can find the genetics for the resistance of trees. So for me, it's been quite an interesting evolution over the last, 9 months since Ken first put us on. we sent emails around to people, those multiplied to other emails, and I think we've discovered there's a bit of a network working on both of these problems. And if anything, because the questions were posed last time, people hadn't been talking together before now are, and it's sort of expanding the sort of scientific nucleus that we have in working on these problems. So for me, it's been a lot of fun, and it's the kind of thing that as a dean I really like to do. But we're still very interested in Penn State at other things like teaching in forestry, recruitment of more foresters. We're looking for help with that sort of thing. We know there's weeds problems as well, which is something we have a lot of expertise. And I know Fred Strathmeyer is here and wants to talk about noxious weeds and so forth. And in our Department of Applied and Biological Engineering, we maintain a strong forest products group that's also interested in biorenewable energy and so forth. So, Mike, what have I left? There's probably a few things I've left out of that are particular to the teaching and the other areas. You want to add in?
I think you covered it. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you for this opportunity and to give a report back to Ken and the others about what's happened since they took us on a field trip last year. Thanks.
Thank you, Dean. And Dr. Messina, do you have more to add?
Sure. Takes me 50 minutes. No, I'm kidding. Yes, I'm the head of Ecosystem Science and Management, which is an overarching name that means that what we contribute is teaching, research, and extension in forestry, wildlife, fisheries, soil science now, water to some extent, and we still have our hand in wood products, a major that was moved to another department. But I mentioned the teaching, the research extension. Penn State is indeed a land-grant university. I just realized sitting here that since 1975, except for 3 years when I lived overseas, I've been either a student or a faculty member in a land-grant university, 3 different ones now. And I really enjoy that. I really bought into that ethos of the land-grant system, of the teaching, the research, the extension. And while it's true that Penn State does not manage large acreage, we don't manage resources, we're not directly affected by cherry prices and so forth like some of the folks around this table, I'd like to think that we are still a pivotal partner. On the teaching side, as Dean Roush mentioned, we want to ensure that our graduates come out ready to serve this industry, and not just the industry, of course, because we do have wildlife and fisheries, serve the resources, if you will. And on the research side, we want to be sure, too, that our research is pertinent to these folks sitting around the table. I consider them partners, stakeholders, and so forth. That's a bit of a challenge because just the evolution of university research through time means that our faculty have to look outside for research funding. And so they have to mesh with what money is available and try to apply that to today's problems. On extension, of course, we want to ensure that our people who transfer that technology to the users are up to date in giving pertinent programs. In the audience today is Kimberly Bone, who will be here or is here in Smethport. And she'll be the face of forestry extension in this part of the world. And so we're very happy that she's here. We stole her away from the University of Florida, the way I look at it. So I think that this sort of thing that I'm doing here today is very important. I enjoy this type of thing. It's more fun than running a faculty meeting back on campus. But I like to come out here. I like to learn what's going on. I like to contribute to the discussion in any way we can. Yes, we are kind of on the fringe, but I think we're very important. And this industry has been very, very good to us. I still refer to our building on campus as a new building. It's 11 years old now, just realized. But it's arguably the most beautiful building on campus. You walk in that building, you see, I think it's something like $700,000 worth of donated Pennsylvania black cherry. You see names on the walls of the donors that helped us out. The former head of development told me that millions, with an S, millions were donated to that building, largely due to a robust forest products economy in Pennsylvania. And so it's been a two-way street, and that where I feel that we benefited from the industry, and I hope that we're giving back to the industry, again, on the teaching, the research, and extension. So thanks for inviting me today. I really enjoy this sort of thing.
We're glad to have you here, so thank you for being here, and I appreciate your expertise. Now I'd like to move into the question and comment period from the members, because I think that's an opportunity for us to talk about specific issues and hopefully moving towards solution to specific issues. So I'll first turn to my good friend and co-chair, Representative Pashinsky.
Thank you, Representative. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you, and I want you to know that it's an excellent experience for me coming from an urban community, not having any ownership of a farm, but I do have a love of horses. I've ridden them, and we've certainly planted tomatoes. So that's about the extent of my experience, but I want you to know that it is truly, truly a pleasure for me to be with you. Pennsylvania is a magnificent state. You live in an absolutely glorious part of the state, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of this and to understand how well you've taken care of the forest. I also want to compliment my partner, Marty Causer, chairman of this committee. Marty is not only engaging, he's very knowledgeable, and I really appreciate working with you, Marty, and I look forward to it. I think the point that maybe I want to make here is that we are Pennsylvania. This is a resource that many people do not understand, and I would be a fitting example of that. My role as a legislator has been primarily in the healthcare area, so this is a whole new experience for me. But I can tell you that in the short time that I've been the minority chair, I've had the absolute pleasure of being introduced to countless people within ag, forestry, and all aspects of the agriculture industry, just absolutely fabulous people who love what they do. And as many of you have pointed out, this has been a part of your heritage, a part of your family, and you take this thing very seriously. I will also do the same. I've heard you loud and clear. We had a wonderful conversation last night with Ken, and we're talking about the fact that you do not have enough young people coming into the industry. It's a little mind-boggling why Pennsylvania would have to pay 54 cents on the dollar and New York half of that. So Chairman Causer and I already had the conversation. We're going to work together on that, and our executive directors also have a great working relationship. They are in the process right now of setting up meetings with our Department of Labor and our Department of Education so we can begin to address the issue. I don't want to take this time. I have, my former time was as an educator, so I have a list of questions here. But just a couple observations and one or two things that I would like to clear up for myself. Number one, in advertising, in demonstrating the importance, the economic importance of the timber industry, I would like to offer this for your consideration. We just had a hearing at Parks Casino relative to the horse industry. And there was a great visual. As Susan mentioned, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And they had a picture of a horse. And then it was off of that horse were lines that were drawn demonstrating how many people were employed in order to take care of that horse. We had Mr. Tom, right? Tom Case, who has been in this industry for decades. Not know that Lancaster and York and Philadelphia profit by this. So that picture, that picture of the forest, not just creating jobs here, but how it permeates throughout the state and demonstrates that it is a vital industry, will help us then sell whatever we need to in order to drive, whether it's legislation or change in regulations, to help you be more productive and sustain yourselves. So to another educator, I'm saying, let's see whether we can't come up with some kind of pictorial that is very teachable to the rest of the community, including our fellow legislators who need to grasp onto the importance of passing certain legislation or regulations. So that was one of the main points that I wanted to make there. And then the other question I'd have, and maybe you already have this, in your forest management, and I really enjoyed as I had this traveling through this beautiful territory here, I've seen where you've harvested certain woods, and you can see certain areas where it's beginning to grow again. That is absolutely a critical aspect of demonstrating to the rest of the people what you have to do as a farmer of trees. And that 100 years is such an incredible point that has to be made. Nobody ever thinks of that. I never thought of that. So this has been an enlightening just a few hours together with you. And we have work to market. So maybe the possibility of actually even hiring a marketing firm and having that conversation to really demonstrate how vital this incredible resource is to Pennsylvania. And that's basically it. Representative Karsler and I, we are one. There is no political division here. Agriculture, forestry, timbering, this is our job. Let's get it done. So I thank you all, and it's a real pleasure. I can't wait for the questions and the answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions from the members? Representative Keller?
Well, I'd like to start out, first of all, by thanking you, Marty, for putting this together and bringing it out here. I'm going to kind of go to the point of export. Can you tell me where we in Pennsylvania export our products through?
Yes. Well, first off, I failed to mention previously the total amount of exports we have. We exported $520 million worth of lumber last year and $108 million worth of logs. As far as where we export through, I assume you're referring to the ports. That's a real timely question for us. The reality is that the majority of our wood products historically went out of Baltimore, but with a growing volume now going out of Norfolk through the Front Royal Inland Port going down 81. Another large portion, much smaller, is New York City. Now, the issue with the ports, currently no wood products are coming out of Philadelphia, going out of Philadelphia, while a lot of wood products are coming into Philadelphia, meaning wood pulp that primarily goes to the Procter & Gamble plant in Wyoming County. And that pulp is coming from South America. We're currently working significantly with the Philadelphia port. They are positioning themselves with the result of the dredging of the river and the opening of both the Suez and Panama canals to larger ships. All ports across the East Coast, as well as around the world, are trying to position themselves to be able to accommodate the larger ships that are going to be coming and to be able to move with the times. We have been working closely with the Port Authority there, recently they met with our Hardwood Council in November, and then we had 3 regional meetings across the state with the industry. The result is that a company there, a private company, Western Fumigation, is anticipating, final decisions not made, but to open a fumigation facility at the port in Philadelphia so that logs can easily be exported to certain markets out of Philadelphia. Philadelphia already has agreed to match the price of shipping out of Philadelphia with ports in New York and Baltimore to destinations in Europe and in South America. And because of the larger ships and more ships coming into Philadelphia, that's opening those ports. The biggest problem is still the Asia market. They're not able to be exactly competitive yet because they don't have the direct ships. But once the ships start coming into Philadelphia, and the reality is Philadelphia is going to be well positioned to be able to take some of the pressure off of the New York City port. As I understand, the ships that come into the East Coast, they hit 2 or 3 different ports, but they all hit New York City. And New York City is not able to grow as Philadelphia is able to grow. And with our proximity, Philadelphia's proximity to New York, we should be able to take some of that pressure off of New York and be able to grow some of that market for Philadelphia. So we're working on Philadelphia, but the unfortunate side of the story is nothing is going out of Philadelphia at this stage, but we're moving in a positive way.
Well, don't you think that we should be looking at the ports within the Commonwealth? If we're shipping Commonwealth, why not have those ancillary jobs actually be in Pennsylvania? You know, what do we need to do as legislators to make those things happen for the timber industry? Is it, excuse me, would it be more economical for us to be going out of our own state versus going to New York and going to Baltimore or whatever, Port Norfolk or wherever we're using?
Industry has clearly told us that the expense of going to Philadelphia, it's totally driven by business. And historically, it's been cheaper for the proximity of where our industry is exporting from to go to the alternative ports rather than Philadelphia. Partly due to the turnpike tolls and access and the Schuylkill Expressway and the time lost in accessing the Philadelphia port, infrastructure issues, that the land costs of transportation from the company to the port is higher for Philadelphia. And then historically, the rates going out of Philadelphia, going to other markets, and the fact that Philadelphia didn't have enough destinations. In Philadelphia, you may have just a ship going to Europe once or twice a month or week, as opposed to almost daily out of the other ports. So it was overall the structure is why the industry did not go to Philadelphia. One of the things that we've explored through the years is to get an inland port established so that companies could just take to a train and load on the train. But the trains, they've looked at Du Bois, they've looked at Clearfield, they've looked at Johnstown area as possible options for those trains to be able to take the material. But the trains, it's not been cost effective. They want to run long. It's actually cheaper to get wood from Chicago to Philadelphia than it is from Kane, Pennsylvania to Philadelphia.
Secretary, did you have something?
I was just going to add, I mean, I think the Hardwood Development Council started this conversation about 6 months, 9 months ago, and it's been around for a while, but in a general conversation about agricultural exports out of the Port of Philadelphia, it was sort of revealing, is that there aren't any, right? And this has been an issue for us as we sort of stepped into the strategic plan for agriculture is why? And if you look at what's coming in, certainly we are a great port of entry, but very poor port of export out of the port. And 2 things have happened. One, there's a new management team at the port. There's been a $200 million investment by federal funds to dredge that port, so now we can take the Panamax ships coming in. We did negotiate with the owners there and the team to be competitive, right? And they've put on the table that would match the price out of Virginia and Baltimore. And that's incredibly important. And then we needed this issue of fumigation to be addressed, right? We had facility there at one time, and I don't know the history, but it simply went away. And there's been this sort of question now, is that it's a need for sure, do you place that at the port? So I see that, this convergence of both capacity now to export out, a new mindset there, a competitive price. You have that being a port of call by major shipping lines and anticipated to grow just by business development with the Panamax ships and the Suez Canal and such. I think the timing is perfect. Now, you still have the economics, right, of running from McKean County into that area. But I would hope that is a conversation it started, right, and there's questions there. The whole point is to get this out of the port of Philly and move, ag exports generally, but if it's our largest export out of Pennsylvania, let's try to use the infrastructure and the jobs and the value chain that we have here in PA. So it's a great question. Good work by the council and the industry on that.
I just want to offer one thing. As Chair of Urban Affairs, we're looking very seriously at the port, along with the Chair of Agriculture. We've actually, Marty and I have been discussing this, and we may end up there on a dual hearing to discuss those things. So you have my commitment to work with the Department of Ag, to work with our Ag Committee and try to address some of these issues that are there. But again, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Keller. Representative Lawrence?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and certainly appreciate all of our panelists for taking the time to be here today as well to make this hearing a success. A question I wanted to bring up, a constituent in my neck of the woods brought up to me an issue. He is a forester, and he is a kind of a smaller player, I think it's fair to say, and he'll purchase a stand of trees and then go in to select which ones he's going to take and harvest. He's run into an issue which he's actually submitted an acre request for review by the Attorney General on, and I certainly don't want to put forward that I'm asking anyone to comment on a specific case, but more generally just the topic at hand. In his situation, the local municipality, the township, has levied an escrow, a non-refundable escrow, that the municipality is using to hire an engineer to re-review his engineer's work. And apparently this is outside of the township's ordinances, and that's the meat and potatoes of the acre case. But I guess my question to the panel is, what type of issues do you see? Is this a common issue, or maybe not so much as a common issue, where you see local municipalities, the townships or local boroughs, coming in with kind of extraneous or kind of something that might not be normal to interfere with harvesting of timber?
Again, local ordinance issues are always an issue, and we're thankful for the acre law that's been able to resolve some of these. One of the core principles for which the Hardwood Development Council was created in 1988 was timber access and to deal with these issues. Previously to 2008, when our budgets were extremely cut, we had worked closely with Professor at Penn State and had developed model ordinances and guidance for local ordinances. To sort of explain at least my experience in dealing with local townships, typically in local townships you've had supervisors that have been in those positions for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And it's a job that they agree to do, and when someone comes and decides they want to run against them, they sometimes just retire because they've never had to be in an election really where they were competitive. And what's happened in many of our townships is baby boomers, early retirees have moved into rural Pennsylvania and don't understand forestry and understand the issues, and in those cases they decide I can make a contribution, and so they decide to run for the township supervisor, and the other supervisors just resign because it's suddenly an election and they're not really interested in a popularity contest. And they've served well, but many of these new people coming into local townships, they do pass some ordinances that are protective and they don't understand. I like to say to them that as you look at a farmer plowing his field this time of year and you see the idyllic vision of that happening, we need to have that same mentality and vision when we see a logger cutting down trees, because they're providing the opportunity for the new trees to grow back. And so we should see that in a positive sense. But local people in their own townships who don't like to see forestry and trees cut down, that becomes an issue for them. So there's many townships that are passing ordinances that are unreasonably restrict forestry. And so there are laws that are there. We have it on our agenda that if we were funded, one of the top priorities is to review those ordinances and to do more education out to the township supervisors about the issues in forestry. It was last done, but it's something that we have as a goal, but don't have the funds to be able to proceed with it.
Thank Wayne for his comments, and the secretary here and I were reminiscing that at one point in the Governor's Green Ribbon Task Force, we had the supervisors, or the state level supervisors of the Township Board of Supervisors, if I said that correctly. They came to one of our working group sessions to discuss those exact issues. A lot of it was focused on the road bonding issues that come up at local levels versus state levels, but also municipal ordinances that deal with forestry practice and things like that. And what we really clearly were able to identify was that it's an education issue with those municipal leaders. And I think one of the recommendations or bullet points that came out of the Green Ribbon Task Force was to more formally engage with those municipalities when they're involved in crafting these types of ordinances, to let them know what our industry and what forestry is really all about, and you know, the level of diligence that goes into preparing a timber harvest plan by a forester, and that it's not really necessary sometimes to have those multiple levels of that onerous review and restrictions. So that was something that was tackled in the Green Ribbon Task Force. That's an action item going forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Klunk. Go ahead.
The issue of local ordinances usually aren't too much of a problem in our part of the world, but our professional association, the Association of Consulting Foresters, practices forestry across the state and had that as a major issue as well. And a few years ago, if you recall, the legislature and the Senate passed a bill of the right to practice forestry in Pennsylvania. And that act, if used properly, might help that forester against that township, because it was identified in that legislation that you have the right to practice forestry. And many of those ordinances are written, as Wayne mentioned, to restrict forest activity. And if you exercise that bill properly, he may be able to use that as the right of that landowner to practice forestry.
Thank you. Representative Klunk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for everyone joining us this morning. As a full disclosure, my uncle actually was educated at Penn State in the forestry program and went on to Maryland and served for a number of years with their Department of Forestry. So it's in the family genes, maybe not directly, but he was very excited I was coming up here for this trip. So I'll give him a full report when we get home. But where I'm from York County. My district is actually only a couple miles from PH Gladfelter. So when you spoke about York County being one of those top counties, number 2 in the state that gets your hardwoods for use in manufacturing, that really got me excited, because it means that we have jobs in our local community. A number of my constituents work at PH Gladfelter. Great company, great jobs, and so thank you for providing that wood. Now, what we're seeing, we're a manufacturing community in my district, and what we're seeing, you're seeing it in the timber industry, we're seeing it in manufacturing, where we're having a number of baby boomers retire. And our young folks are just not interested in manufacturing because it's dirty, it's not clean, it's not sexy, it's manufacturing. But manufacturing today isn't quite what it was, in my grandparents' generation or my parents. So we've taken a little bit of a different approach in trying to get kids in to see that it's different. It's not, what you think of, and educating parents. And it's taken a long time to really change that mindset in our local community about what that industry really is and what it means to a young person maybe entering that industry. So my question goes to, what is the industry doing to partner with local school districts, local community colleges? Here we're at a branch campus of Pitt here at Bradford. What are you doing to make those connections? And how can maybe even a community like mine, where we're doing on the manufacturing side, how can we even maybe work together in seeing what's working in our local community to help you, and maybe see if there's Department of Labor, Department of Ag. I know Department of Ag has a gentleman who works solely on workforce development. How can we help you grow this industry and make sure young people are staying here in Pennsylvania? Because I think we're exporting people who, are my age and younger, and we really need to be keeping them here, importing them. So how can we help you do that and keep them here?
Excuse me. One of the issues in dealing with recruiting young people in the forest products industry is because from kindergarten on up to their high school experience, they've been taught cutting down trees is bad. And they have that concept. Now there in York County, you have not only Gladfelter, but you have York wallpaper, you have York casket, as well as several other, a large exporter, O'Shea Lumber, as well as many other sawmills and secondary wood mills. There's the kitchen cabinetry is in Lancaster, and the furniture, and then also paper industry and stationery and cardboard, which is where Philadelphia comes into the top markets. But as far as young people looking at jobs, you're correct that one issue is we're seeing more and more schools, and the statistics that the state keeps on schools, they seem to reward those that go on to colleges and not to the VOTEC programs. And so there's been a change in the shift that we need to, not necessarily, college isn't for everyone, and to try to save those jobs here. The Hardwood Council has partnered with one of our other hardwood utilization groups, the Keystone Wood Products Association, and we funded a new website called paforestcareers.org. It's run officially by KWPA, but it's a program of the Hardwoods Development Council, and it's a young, glamorous, in the words of the kids, sexy website talking about forest careers. And it's got some videos and information that links to the Department of Labor and Jobs. And one of the things that that website offers is the option to request a mentor. So as a young person is looking for a career, if they have decided, well, I'd like to be a lumber grader, or I'd like to work as on an assembly line on a furniture mill or something like that, they can respond on that, and that email comes to me. I refer it either to one of our utilization groups, or as I know the industry across the state, I try to find someone that will make at least one phone contact to that young person to talk about the benefits of that job. The other issue, though, is we now have the life cycle analysis done on wood. And we need to be able to sell to our young people the fact that cutting down trees is doing something good for the environment. And we have the science behind us now to show that. That when it comes to the manufacturing industry, we can actually cut our wood 100 miles from a sawmill. The sawmill can be, in this case, Indiana. The state of Indiana, one of the farthest states for the wood resource to get to a port. The port is Baltimore, and the destination is Japan. And every species of lumber will arrive in Japan 20 to 50% carbon negative. And so as you add the carbon cost of making the secondary wood products, you're seeing the possibility that you actually are having a carbon negative product when you make something out of local sustainable wood, and you're helping to store the wood carbon. So we're doing a lot more work through our Woodmobile program in the schools, and as well as we're trying to use more social media to get to the kids to help them to understand that using wood is green and one of the best alternatives. If they're concerned about the environment, you want to be involved in the wood products industry.
I would say also, more on a local level, we at Collins, we try to engage with, we're fortunate that the Kane Area High School has a real strong VOAG program. We do try and interact with those folks that are in the forestry program there. In fact, last year, 3 of us Collins Foresters, met with them and had a full day exercise doing inventory in one of our parks and kind of showing them what being a forester is all about. Also, we've come to, Pitt Bradford has put on, career fairs, and, we've come to those to try and engage young people, showing them the opportunities that do exist in the forest products industry. I think to take off, Wayne's comment, kind of that, the sexy appeal for the younger folks, how can we attract them is, maybe I'm a dreamer sometimes, but the thought popped into my head is, I think it'd be a really cool thing, kind of tie in with the Woodmobile education thing, is if you had some sort of simulator of especially nowadays, you have these mechanized harvesters and some of the kind of flashy logging equipment that some of these operators are using these days. I think you put a 16-year-old kid in something like that, you might turn them on to a career that, hey, this could be pretty cool. You're out there, as a professional logger, but it's almost like you're sitting there running joysticks like you're playing a video game. So I think they don't make that connection that there's a lot of technology in our profession. And, if we could marry the history of the timber industry into how it's coinciding with the latest and greatest technology and get young people energized about that, I think, maybe that dream of something we could marry with that Woodmobile would be a tool to do that.
If you could pass the mic to John.
Thanks, Ken. You had a couple of questions in there I think I'd like to address. And first is, as an outgrowth from the Green Ribbon Task Force, DCNR, Department of Agriculture, and DEP has agreed to fund a position within the Department of Education. And probably in 2010, they had an environmental education chief there that would look at curriculum in schools. From the environmental education side. That position was cut, and we've seen a real slide in the types of curriculum that's going into our schools. So again, out of the outgrowth of the Green Ribbon Task Force, is we're going to fund a position that's going to go back into Department of Ed that can focus on subjects just like this. As we talk about young kids, thinking that cutting trees is a bad thing. We need to change that mentality. So there's some other ways that we can do that. In the Bureau of State Parks, we have environmental educators. They reach about 400,000 kids a year through schools and through teachers programs. And we're incorporating that type of information into our training also as we reach out to kids. We also will be taking advantage of, there's about 4 million folks that visit, 40 million folks that visit state parks annually. And places where we have the opportunity, we'll have interpretive displays that where you do some forest management practices, whether it's in the state park or state forest, that explains to folks exactly what's going on so that they just don't see, in their minds, a devastation. They see the beginning of a process like Wayne was talking about. And lastly, unfortunately, I don't remember the name of the school, but I had the opportunity to be at the Pennsylvania Wilds banquet about a week and a half ago. And some schools in the Northern Tier are doing some really fantastic video work that they're showing to their students, and it's made by students. So the one that I saw was about the powdered metal industry and the manufacturing there, and it's not a real sexy thing when you think about it, but these kids put together a video that's going to be shown to other kids that I think is really going to stimulate the opportunities for kids to really see that it isn't the dirty, grimy work that you would think of in manufacturing, that it is very high tech, and it is a very sustainable career.
If I could offer a couple comments, I think you're hearing a lot of us talking about the education side of things. You specifically talked to manufacturing, but to take that to the other side, to the actual forest management, That was something we spent a lot of time on, the education of youth in the Green Ribbon Task Force. And from the Game Commission's perspective, when you look at landowner attitudes, the Center for Private Forests at Penn State, Dr. Jim Finley, has done a tremendous amount of work surveying landowners and why they own land and what they want to gain from their ownership of land. And if you look at it, it's always number 1 or 2 is wildlife. Wildlife always comes up as a very high value for land ownership and for people and how they view forests. So we're trying to take those opportunities, something that people care about. That's your hook to start that educational process. You got to find something that they care about. So if we can hook them in talking about wildlife and the importance of managing forests and harvesting timber and creating different age classes and different structure in the forest and how that relates to wildlife, we've seen that be a great tool to engage youth at a very young age. I handed out some bullet points to the members there, and in the bottom you'll see a little personal comment. I had the opportunity to take my 5-year-old daughter out this year on a bear den visit, and perfectly that mother bear decided to den in the middle of a recent timber harvest. So there was blackberry briar bushes and new regeneration coming up, and on the ride home I talked to my daughter the whole time about why that bear chose that spot, because the foresters decided to go in and harvest trees and create a different habitat. It was less than a month later, she was at school and it was Earth Day, and she came home and she told me that the teachers were talking about how we need to plant more trees because they clean the air, and we need to not cut trees down because they're important. And she boldly responded to the teacher that we need to cut trees because it makes habitat for animals. And I thought, well, that's a win, and maybe she'll educate all her little friends. But I think that speaks to where it starts. And when we say youth, I look all the way down there at that kindergarten level, and even so with youth and with landowners, to find a way to hook them into seeing their forests differently. Wildlife, I think, is a key role in that. The Game Commission's had a program since about 2008, Seedlings in the Schools. We have a tree seedling nursery in Howard, Pennsylvania, down near State College. And since about 2008, we've been reaching out and putting tree seedlings out into school programs. We've been in over 800 schools a year, roughly. We send these tree seedlings out for the kids to plant with an educational packet about trees and wildlife, and there's some nuggets in there about forestry and sustainable timber harvesting and sustainable habitat management. So that's one of the efforts we've put in to try to engage those youth. But I think whether you're talking manufacturing and getting young people engaged with the new technology, or whether you're talking about forest management and landowner attitudes or youth attitudes, I think wildlife can be a key factor in getting people hooked.
If I could add briefly to your question, as one who served 30 years as a school director in a rural school district, one thing that I saw that occurred that was probably a challenge, and I think you as legislators see the importance of putting decisions back on the local level, because it's the local school board that recognizes what's needed for jobs, careers, and direction of young people and students. And if you give them that local control, because one thing that occurred while I was a school director is we had a vocational agriculture program that exposed students from the 9th through 12th grade to a semester of different disciplines: carpentry, masonry, forestry, welding, ag mechanics, and that gave that student the opportunity to choose where to go for a higher education. But if they didn't choose, they at least had a foundation of each of those disciplines to be a homeowner, to have life skills. But recently, with the change in taking the vocational agriculture certification away from these school districts, they're forced to go to career technical schools. So the school district that I at one time represented buses kids over 40 miles a day to a career technical school. That's a very inefficient way of doing things. So even though Tom referred to our school district of having a strong vocational agriculture program, it's now an elective rather than a curriculum and an accredited curriculum. Things of that nature, and you folks are already starting that trend, but if we have people, as John mentioned, to review curricula to make sure they meet a standard, and then put the responsibility on the local school districts to make sound decision to their needs, we don't have a broad paintbrush approach. We have a fine-tuned paintbrush that benefits our Commonwealth collectively.
Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, we could talk a lot about workforce, but just to note a couple of things, because it ties back to this definition of agriculture a little bit, right? There's a lot of pieces to this. And in our work of really looking at the workforce of agriculture, it's interesting who sees themselves in it and who's actually in it. And I just say that because if you go in parts of the state, I mean, folks will, if you say manufacturing, they put some of even the hardwoods industry is viewed as manufacturing. It's not viewed as agriculture, even though agriculture has manufacturing in it. You go to sectors of the food industry, they see themselves as food manufacturers and not part of agriculture. And I say that because in our efforts with the Department of Education, Department of Labor, at the end of the day, it's trying to figure out what is identified as a growth occupation, high priority occupation that leads to where you make investments in training and where you actually lead educational systems to teach. And I think just for the committee, Representative Keller is working on some things around ag ed that'll help us. We made a commitment to help fund the environmental education position. We have funded a workforce development person to really get to the nitty-gritty of if it's a real job, what's the classification and what are the competencies and where do you find them? And you do this inventory of Pennsylvania as to where these jobs, where does somebody receive training? For some, it'll come out of our K-12, and the reality is a lot of it's done on-the-job training. But as we find in the forest products industry, as the rest of agriculture, technology is changing every job. And where does that come from? We make a lot of assumptions that it'll just simply, you'll be hired and then trained, and what the employers are saying, I need the training. For some, it's a degree and very clear credential. In other places, it really is trying to define that credential. And what does that look like for the forest products industry? So a lot of discussion points around that, but it's a great question. And really, when you look at the task force report, we touched on a lot of these points. Taking that to the next level now, right, of really looking at very specific jobs, and that's where industry can be helpful, is one. Two is, I think, for all of us connected to the issue of the agricultural workforce is sensitizing both ourselves in the narrative of what is agriculture in that definitional point, but also encouraging industry to be specific, right, about what are those jobs and where are you sourcing it now. We had this great conversation last night about the community college dilemma here in the Northwest, right? And one of those revelations that we just believe that everybody has access to a community college across Pennsylvania. You've lived that, Mr. Chairman, and others. But I think it's a great point, and how do you build that and what you build around. So it's a great question, good discussion, and really is at the foundation, I think, of a lot of the questions about the industry, sustainability, but also the public opinion of what it is that this industry does or can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Representative Bloom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to all the testifiers. It's been very informative so far. A question I always like to ask whenever I get together with folks from any industry in Pennsylvania, and this is really a question targeted for those of you who are in the private sector piece of this. What are some of the ways that state government in particular, and in particular tax and regulatory policies at the state level, are actually impeding your ability to invest in creating Pennsylvania jobs? Where is the state government an obstacle to your success and your growth and your continued reinvestment, again, in creating jobs here in our Commonwealth? I know we already touched a little bit on the workers' comp issue, so we probably don't need to revisit that one, but are there any other spots in the tax and regulatory environment that we might be able to work on?
If you recall earlier, I made my comments, I made the assimilation between dairy farming and the forest products industry. And you have to grow up in it. And I'll give you an example. There's a family, fella's a logger. His one son was a very bright young man, went to Lehigh University on an academic scholarship. His younger son was more of a hands-on, do-it type of fella. And he said, you know, I got to take this kid to the woods. He's gonna make a decent living doing what I do. And he was out there when the kid was 10 years old and had him on his lap driving his skidder, and someone saw him going down the road and said, hey, you can't do that. You're breaking the law. The kid's not allowed on that skidder until he's 18. That labor law of not letting that man mentor his son. Now, on the other extreme of that is Marty and I have a common acquaintance, we could say friend in the district, that didn't really care about the laws and took his 10-year-old son out and gave him a small chainsaw. He started cutting down trees, and I wouldn't even let him near my project. I just cringed. I cringed. That was 9 years ago. That young man's probably one of the youngest and more profitable loggers in the region today. Now, was I comfortable? No. But I told the guy just 4 days ago when I saw him, you were right, I was wrong. But I'm glad I didn't have to say I told you so. So that regulation of letting the parent make the decision rather than we have that broad-based, you can't do it, he's not 18, you're not allowed out there. So those type of regulations are some of it that might help our workforce. It really might.
I'd just like to quickly add that across the board, I hear sawmills, manufacturers, everybody up the scale that talks about unreasonable regulations. And I'm not going to cite any in particular, but when companies have to have a person that does only that, deals with permitting and regulatory issues, that becomes a pretty large financial burden, and it also takes a lot of time. And I've heard that across the board at almost all of our industries. So I think in general, look at the regulations, see if they're actually doing what they need to do, and make them as streamlined as possible.
If I could give a real right-wing approach, excuse me for this, but I will.
I'm okay with that. I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm okay with that.
This is a difficult thing. But one of the things in the transitions we've seen in our industry is when the industry condensed in 2007 to 2009, we lost a lot of family businesses, a lot of family sawmills that might cut 10 or 15,000 board feet a day. But they employed some people in the community that had a work ethic, but otherwise weren't employable because they were pretty basic jobs. And they paid them what they could afford to pay them. But the only thing that kept those people working was the work ethic, because the entitlement programs would have provided them a better quality of life than even working. And we have to try to tighten up the entitlement. I'm sorry to say that. We want to take care of everybody, and I'm not saying we don't. But the entitlement at some point in our society is greater than the ability to earn a living, and we have to instill the pride into those individuals of what it means to bring home a paycheck rather than just make some type of card withdrawal that I thankfully don't understand.
If I may as well, back to me, the dreamer. Once upon a time, the federal government had a program of the Civilian Conservation Corps, and I think that was quite an appropriate program at the time and really put a lot of people to work at a time where it was needed, gave them life skills, and a lot of that infrastructure now is approaching 100 years old, and many of those are things that we might see in some of our state parks, especially state forest lands. Maybe some of those able-bodied people, rather than getting a card, we should think about some sort of state program similar to that, and at least revisit that model and say, is there something in 2017 that would make sense where people that physically are able to do work but might not be employed or employable, can we create a program where the state is getting benefits from that rather than just a card that we're supporting those people when we could probably be giving them life skills and help them support themselves and benefit the Commonwealth?
excellent comments. You kind of set me up here. So in DCNR, we started last year the Pennsylvania Outdoor Corps, which was based loosely on the Pennsylvania Conservation Corps, which used to be in Department of Labor and Industry. And that was based loosely on the Conservation Corps, the CCC. So what we're doing there is last year we had 5 crews of kids, 15 to 18 years old. They worked and did conservation work. We also introduced them to a variety of different professions within the conservation world and the outdoor world. So I think the forest product industry was strongly represented there. This year, through support, and much of the financial support, excuse me, is coming through the Department of Labor and Industry through the workforce redeployment money. But what we've been able to do this year is, the second part of it is we have a young adult corps, which is 18 to 25 years old, 10-month program. They're doing a whole lot more hands-on, a lot of building, reconstructing, like you're saying, fixing old CCC structures, those types of things. But again, it's introducing them to work opportunities in the out of doors and the conservation world. In addition to those young adult crews, this summer we'll have 14 youth crews around the state. They'll be working on public lands, but they'll also be working with some partners on nonprofits and also municipalities doing types of conservation work.
Thank you very much. Next is Representative Dush. And if we can try to keep our questions concise and to the point. I'm enjoying the discussion, but I'm looking at the time and want to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. So thank you.
Thank you. Ken, you were right. 2.5 hours goes very quickly. 2 quick points, and then I have a question. First, Chairman Keller brought up about the infrastructure, and Secretary Redding, you also pointed out how we have an infrastructure problem here as far as getting things down to the ports and that sort of things. Your deputy, Fred, and I are we're looking at working with DCED to get the rail infrastructure. We don't have a transload facility northwest of Harrisburg in the Commonwealth. We need an intermodal facility somewhere in the region here to where we can get our products onto a train down to the southeast and out to the ports. Second, Chairman Pashinsky brought up something very interesting about the visual effects. Ken brought some photographs with him that actually show the same stand of trees over an 80-year period from 1920 right up into the early 2000s. And to see the difference between what we experienced around here, I always say there's a huge difference between conservationists and environmentalists. Conservationists understand what we are doing here in our region now, where these areas have been clear-cut, and I'm not just talking in certain areas, the entire northern tier had been clear-cut back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And now we've got these magnificent forests that are a wonderful resource, and we're getting that resource, as Wayne said, to Japan at a 20% carbon negative. We are green, and our people in the industry, all the industries that we have in this area, we love our land, we love our resources, we love our water, and we're doing a phenomenal job that is recognized worldwide with even the products that we're producing. So we need to get those visual representations out there. Ken, I've told the video crew I'd love to see that part of this, and if you could maybe talk with those guys afterwards and have the videos or show the pictures and let them see the progression and present that as part of the production. And 2, I've got some photographs of an entire region around Bradford and around Jefferson County. I'm going to forward to them. Maybe they can incorporate those as well so that you can actually see. We're a very visual society right now. you can actually see the difference in what we are actually producing now and how wonderful our environment is up here. My question has to do with the workers' compensation side. One, are most of our loggers involved with the State Workers Insurance Fund, or is it predominantly private? And then the study that the HDC and Penn State were working on at the fall, have you guys got any information back as to that, as to something that might help us craft something?
I'll answer the first part of the question, and I'll let Wayne answer the study portion. Most of the loggers are really not covered at all. They, under the sole proprietor designation, they don't have to have, which is one of the reasons why we're not growing our industry. So they're not taking on employees, because then they would have to cover them. The state, the SWIFT is supposed to be the last resort. Unfortunately, they're dictating that rate. And private insurance companies aren't going to go any lower than that, really. So one of the things that we've identified in this process is the multiplier. In the median for all industries other than logging is 1.7. Ours is 2.7. So it's double what the median is for every other industry. So if we could maybe have a discussion with SWIFT and find out why that is, and if there would be a way to bring that down. If we could get that down to even 2, which is still more than anybody else is paying, that would bring that rate down to $34 on the dollar. So that's a significant difference. The other thing is the loss cost multiplier. That takes what the actual costs are for injuries and how that plays into what the rate is. Until we can get those rates down, we won't be able to get a large number of loggers insured. And once we do that, then those people, and if the rate's low enough, then those people can then go out and hire more crews, hire people to work for them. But we're kind of stuck in that conundrum. So I hope that answers that part of the question. But SWIFT is one of the insurers.
The logger study that Penn State did, Dr. Michael Jacobson, we had preliminary reports in February, but they were continuing to receive responses yet, and their final report is due in the next few weeks. The student working on it, the semester is ending, so I'm assuming things are going to be finishing up pretty quickly, and we definitely will have the results before June 30th and in a written format. So the study is in process. We've had some surprises in it, but it's a little premature to speak to specifics at this point, but we have some information.
Okay, I would like to see that whenever we get it. I worked as an insurance investigator for a number of years, and I'm very interested in how we can help get the rates down for our workers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Chairman Paszynski?
Could we just stay with this conversation just for a minute? 1.7 as opposed to 2.7. How does the logging industry compare to mining or construction relative to accident and death? Is that what's driving this?
That's part of it. I think part of it is the private enterprise. There are a lot of insurance companies that just don't want to be bothered with logging. I mean, it can be a very dangerous industry. And so I think that safety training and all of that has to be part of the solution. But just from the anecdotal information that I've gotten, I don't think that the losses merit the rate.
Well, that's why I've asked you that, because if the other industries that have similar incidences of tragedy and injury have a lower multiplier, I think we can make the argument for your industry. So
Absolutely, absolutely. I hope that that's what comes out of a lot of these discussions, is that we can actually maybe make that argument and see if it is possible to bring that down. And that would be a non-regulatory, or I mean, legislative fix, so
Yeah.
hopefully that could be done rather quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Representative Roy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question, is with the workers' compensation issue also. It's a very serious problem, very expensive. Now, one thing to keep in mind, workers' compensation rates are always going to be driven by what the claims are. And, when they look at that, they say, okay, for every $100 of payroll, a certain classification has, $10 worth of claims. So the rate's going to be, $10 per 100. If some classification has $50 of claims per $100 of payroll, the loss costs that the rates are derived from is going to be $50. So the rates are always going to reflect what the costs are. So like when you look at the state fund, the State Workers Insurance Fund, I was looking at it here, a law firm, the rate is, 29 cents for every $100 of payroll. If you look at a dairy farm, it's $9.31. And if you think about it, a dairy farm is a lot more hazardous than a law firm. People get kicked by animals and flip over tractors and things like that. Sawmills are $14.25. You get into tree trimming, $36.17. Roofing is $46.40. Logging is $55.10. And if you think about it, those higher hazard things have more claims, more severe claims, more long-lasting lost time, injuries where people miss work. So the root of the problem is preventing as many injuries as possible. And if New York, I haven't looked at New York's rates, but if their premiums are half as much, seemingly they're having half as many claims. So I'm just wondering if we need to look to see what is New York doing, because apparently the people in this industry are having fewer claims, less severe claims. Has that been done?
Well, it has, and some of it is what you're saying, but in New York State, they have a private carrier that has been in business for quite a few years, and they have a robust safety program and have been able to get enough people in the program to offset those costs. I think that's possible in Pennsylvania as well, and that's part of what we're working towards. And I think that safety component and that training component has to be part of the process.
Because like here in Pennsylvania, probably every state, if you do find a private insurer, a company that will write workers' compensation, for logging, when they file their rates with the state insurance department, if their rates are too low and they're inadequate to cover anticipated claims, it gets denied. They don't let them do it. If the rates are too high, where they're going to make obscene profits and just completely rip off their customers, the insurance department doesn't allow that either. So the rate has to be adequate to cover the claims, but not excessive. So I really think a big part of the solution is reducing the number of claims, the frequency and the severity of the claims. And it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of hard work just to create that environment where safety is the number one priority. And then even when that happens, there's it takes they look at rates, I think, for 3 years or something. They average them out. So I mean, it doesn't get instantly fixed. There's kind of a trailing change in the rate after that occurs. But my recommendation would be just do everything possible to improve safety, and that's very difficult to do in a very high hazard industry. But that's just kind of my thoughts. Thank you.
One of the realities for Pennsylvania is that we have the Sustainable Forestry Initiative that works significantly on the logger training. And one of the programs that they're doing right now across the regions is logger rescue training in combination with EMT and fire personnel and volunteers. And I heard the statistic that the process of rescuing a logger actually accounts for 85% more injuries occur as a result of the rescue process. So getting that training done that way will help in many respects. But another issue that I think ties back to our other concern for the state is regarding invasive species. And you're seeing it significantly up in this area is the percent of our forest that's dying from emerald ash borer. And the reality is when loggers or private persons cut down dead trees, the risk of injury is much, much higher. And unfortunately, last year in 2016, I believe we had 8 deaths in the forest products industry, and already this year, 3 deaths in 2017. I know of 3 of those that were directly related to cutting down dead ash. And so the reality of that issue, so our invasive species issues and the dying trees is something, again, that if we address would help in that regard. But I want to commend Chuck Kaup and the SFI program on the work that they're doing. They rely a lot on funding that we're able to transfer from the Hardwood Council to the regional HUGs. The 80% earmark of the funding that comes from us goes to the 3 HUGs. And those, many of them are supporting the logger safety training programs that are going on at that level. With the reduction of funding, that will definitely result in less logger training and safety training. So, thank you.
Representative Zimmerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to start by just thanking Susan and Ken for your comments on the whole regulation issues and being candid about that. Something tells me that has something to do with Pennsylvania ranking 39th and being a business-friendly state. And so with that, I'm Lancaster County, and between our cows and chickens and produce, we have many cabinet shops. As a matter of fact, my district office is at a cabinet facility, Quality Custom Kitchens. Some of you are familiar with them. And also in my district is Conestoga Wood Specialties, which many have heard of, and a huge employer in the 99th district as well. So here's my question. Most times it's easier to build on something and improve something than it is to start something new. And so if Lancaster County and York County are the employers and have all these shops that are utilizing, you know, what you guys grow up here, what can we do beyond the education piece? What is it that we can do to help support and grow the industry and even do better than we are as Lancaster County, and maybe, you know, something that can come out of the legislature as well? What would that be beyond education?
I'm sorry. My quick response is Anthony Hahn is on our council from Conestoga Wood Specialties.
Right, yeah.
And
Good
another
friend.
one of the projects that we've identified, if we were able to be funded, would be to add a 4th HUG for the southeast area that would focus on the secondary wood products, so that that region could also benefit from some of the shared resources to do the education and marketing and program of their products to the market. So if we could fund a 4th HUG for Southeast Pennsylvania, that would be one possibility.
It always comes down to that.
Historically, well, the simple answer is about $100,000. But let me explain that with the Hardwoods Council, prior to 2008, when the economic collapse occurred, and the Hardwood Council received no funding for that year, we had a budget of around $700,000 prior to that, $690,000. and we operated a 400,000 plus grant program, including funding 3 different HUGs. At one time, there were 6 HUGs in the state, and during my tenure and 17 years, we had a Southwest HUG for a short time, but it was not sustainable. Since 2008, historically, we've been getting the Hardwood Council $350,000 per year as a line item in the budget. The salary of the staff of the Hardwood Council has been funded through the Department of Agriculture General Operations Funds. And so that $350,000 that the council's been receiving each year has been earmarked with 80% to go to the 3 HUGs, leaving only the remaining 20% for the operation funding of the council. Last year, the council received $385,000, and therefore each of the 3 HUGs received $102,000. This year, at this point, the 3 HUGs, with the current appropriation suggestion from the House of $328,000, I believe it's $86,466.66. That's available to the 3 HUGs if that is the final recommendation. So that's where the House and the appropriations funding is what's the driving force on that.
Mr. Secretary.
Representative Zimmerman, I reflect on 2 conversations I've had recently with folks in the industry. One is with Ron Jones, Hardwoods, and the other with Oak Hill Veneer. And the central point was trade, right? The most important program that we have is export and international trade. I mean, that is that is something shared within the agricultural community. I mean, the growth in exports, 30, 40, 50% of, commitment of product here is bound outside the U.S. So just keeping us in those trade agreements, right, and keeping the flow and competitive, I'd say, would be the piece that I hear most frequently. Worker issues, but particularly access to market.
Tom, did you have additional?
Yeah, just quickly, I would add to answer your question, I think one of the challenges to bringing some of that secondary manufacturing up to closer to the resource is transportation. The infrastructure to get here. How many of you had a long drive once you left Interstate 80 to get to Bradford or whichever direction you came from? Is, I think having a 4-lane a little closer to our area could really help this area grow economically, our industry in particular.
Representative Zimmerman, thank you for recognizing that. But I think your recognition of that is probably as important for us moving forward as anything, because you know how much now this region affects your region, and we're all in agriculture. And there's another business that exists in your district. Are you is Elizabethtown in your district?
Just west of my district, but yeah.
One of our key herbicide contractors that herbicide the undesirable vegetation that developed here over decades comes from Elizabethtown up here every year. A hardworking individual, does a great service for us. But one thing I think that we have in common with you is the clean and green values. Whereas in Lancaster County, you're trying to preserve green space, and your clean and green laws help you do that. Up here, it's a similar thing, except it's a dynamic negative. McKean County, as I mentioned last night, has the highest clean and green value and cost in the Commonwealth. And even though McKean County is looked at historically as an industrial county, we've been talking about the forest products industry, but the oil industry that was here as well. When you leave here, you're leaving an area that, if you recall last night at the Bradford Club, the pictures on the wall in the oil derricks, there was a time that you could walk from Lewis Run to downtown Bradford without touching the ground because you were on an oil derrick the entire time. And so to think of how this area has changed in that 100 years. But that oil industry fueled 2 world wars because the paraffin-based oil that came out of this region was the only oil that could be refined fine enough for the high-performance aircrafts, because both the First and Second World War were the first aerial wars, and the second in particular. Isn't that right, Representative? Exactly. But it's still an important. Now our paraffin-based oil is important to the cosmetic industry. But if you could, the one thing that we haven't talked much about, and we need to, are the taxation values. I know Tom's too modest and his company's too modest to tell you this, but I'll tell it for you. Collins Pine and their 118,000 acres is in the Forest Game Cooperator Program with the Game Commission. They pay their land is more accessible to the public than some of our public lands. They allow people to hunt. They open the roads in the fall for hunting season so people can access it with a legal vehicle. They allow camping, they allow horseback riding. Anything except non-licensed motorized recreation is welcome on their land. What a gracious landowner. And they don't post it, they don't lease it. They pay a tax bill of about $750,000 a year for their forest land. That's a pretty big bill. And the one thing we have in common is that clean and green rate that they pay. If we could maybe visit that somehow to not shortchange people, but recognize the value that landowners that keep their land to green space, and recognize that value to society, and maybe share that burden for others that benefit from it, if you will. So in answer to your question, in a short way, clean and green. Thank you.
Representative Mao.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, guys. I certainly appreciate the education that I'm getting today. Just in the interest of time, just a couple quick comments. And I was going to talk about a couple other things until you just mentioned the fact that you open your land. And I'll get there in 1 second. This woodmobile I keep hearing about, I can only envision what you're talking about, but I've heard it a dozen times. Somebody, please drive that thing to Harrisburg so we can take a look at this woodmobile and get an education. It's at the farm show? I missed it. I'm so sorry. All right.
We'll get Wayne to park it outside the Capitol, Dan.
Okay, please bring it over to the Capitol. You had mentioned something earlier that also struck a nerve with me about education, where we're going, and how many times did we hear as youngsters, son, if you don't go to college, you're never going to amount to a thing. And boy, did our education system follow that path, and I think they're still following that path, to the point that just a couple of years ago, I sat in an education hearing on Common Core because I didn't understand it, and one of the things that the acting secretary at that time said, that we try to make sure that all of our students are college ready, or it's our job to make sure all students are college ready by the time they graduate high school. And being someone that's a huge advocate of our vocational schools, I thought that was a pretty arrogant thing for her to say myself, because there's a whole world out there, not just academia. Not that it's not important, but look at your industry, and it struck a nerve. Rather than talking about workers' comp, I can ask that question later. I do want to say I'm going to solicit you for help now. I've had a bill that affects you guys greatly for what you just said, Ken. You open your land for hunting, fishing, recreational. My bill, which imprint this in your brain, HB 544, it will be coming over to the Senate again this year. Basically what it says is, if you open your land free of charge for recreational purposes and someone gets hurt on your land, they can't sue you, but if they do and they lose, they have to pay your legal fees. I've got 48 organizations, statewide and federal, DCNR is one of them, that have endorsed that bill. I have one that is against it, which is the trial lawyers. And the one has now beaten the 48 a few terms in a row. I think if you would maybe ask your senator that represents this area if he could help push that along. It would be, that would be Mr. Scarnati. He carries a lot of weight, and that's a very important bill for your industry. I'm sure, tort reform is very important. That would certainly be helpful. And I just want to say thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative Mowell. Senator Hutchinson?
I just wanted to make a real quick statement of something that's been touched on, especially by the folks from York and Lancaster, and that's the secondary wood products industry. And what obviously that's a very big subject, but what can we do to build that instead of just exporting logs? Make value-added items with those in the state of Pennsylvania and export those value-added things. And I know that's not an easy thing to take care of, but it is a subject matter that I just wanted laid on the table here. As I said, it was brought up earlier by some successful areas in doing that, but I think Pennsylvania would benefit greatly if we could do more in promoting Pennsylvania as a location for value-added wood products. So if you want to comment, if not, that's fine, but I just really wanted to get that into the record and let people think about that as we go forward.
When the Hardwoods Council was created in 1988, it was expressly written into the law that the Hardwood Council would support the value-added forest products industry, and that's our primary focus. Regarding the log exports and those issues, that is something that we support, but we don't enable. Historically, when I was doing trade shows, a completely exclusive log exporter did not have the opportunity to register for those trade shows until there was open spaces and the industry had the opportunity. So as far as log exports, that's the reality of being a global market, and our hands are tied. But the Hardwood Council itself, we certainly give information and guidance. We have information that we share, but we do not promote the export of logs directly. Regarding the secondary wood products, as far as what we can do to continue to improve that, I believe as we begin to see the science on the wood is green and the options of buying local and sustainable, it's unfortunate that, for example, when you built a green certified LEED building, if you brought FSC certified eucalyptus flooring from South America, you got more points than if you put in flooring that was made here in Pennsylvania 20 miles down the road. So we're working on some of those issues as well to be able to promote local and sustainable. And as the consumers, and when it comes to secondary wood products, we've historically seen Europe as the market driving situation. We would love to have cherry come back into vogue as the #1 kitchen that's being put in people's homes, but unfortunately the American consumer wants maple that's painted, and they call it opaque. And so the secondary cabinetry is going to the other species than cherry. And so it's the consumers that are driving those markets. And as historically it's been Europe followed by the United States to follow those trends, I certainly am one of the big advocates for downplaying the bamboo fad for flooring and also downplaying a laminate flooring. I call it the HGTV mentality of the consumer as they watch those programs and see that they can do a kitchen for $5,000 or $10,000. Those are MDF kitchen cabinets that look like they're painted maple, but they're not the solid maple. So the consumer is really driving that market. And what we can do is just continue to tell our story about the green environmental benefits of using solid and quality wood.
Thank you, Wayne.
Could I make it, other than that, I would say all of the above. Everything we've talked about today would contribute to making this area more business friendly. If we can employ more people here, if we can get, all of those things, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, but I think that if we can reduce some of the regulations, do the education component. And the one comment I wanted to make about that education, everybody talked about a piece. If somehow maybe you could convene something like this to have all of those people that are doing pieces, put them to get together in a more cohesive unit, and then we could all be speaking with the same voice, and we could be doing a whole lot of outreach. But I think that this opportunity could lead to something else. And the more times we do these things, the more creative people you get together, and solutions come out of that. So I want to thank you for that, and hopefully this won't be the first and the last.
Thank you, Sue. Representative Zimmerman? I'm sorry. Representative Gillen.
Yeah, thank you very much. I very much enjoyed this session. It's been extraordinarily informative for me. I have a diagnostic question relative to China, and then I have a follow-up question. It's been many years since I've been to China, and the manufacturers of furniture in China, as I understand, are concentrated south of Guangzhou, Shundi, in that area. And if my sources are correct, in that one city, there's 1,500 manufacturers of furniture in that particular area. The tariffs and the import duties, if someone were to bring in chairs or sofas, for example, I also understand, are at 0% coming back to the United States. Is my information accurate relative to the number of factories, the concentration of them in the area south of the old Canton, Guangzhou, and Shundi?
My short answer is that historically your answer is yes. Historically, I believe the answer is yes, especially the upholstered furniture and the furniture that was in the Guangzhou area. Over the years, I've actually been able to host representatives from the Dongguan Furniture Association in that area. But China has recognized the importance of the wood products industry. The emerging middle class of China loves America wood. They especially loved red oak when the prices of red oak collapsed. And so they started buying red oak. So that's the #1 species that's sent to China. And they have done a lot of infrastructure development as their population is so predominantly on their East Coast, their major cities on the East Coast. They're actually sending much of their furniture and wood production into Chengdu in central China and other areas. Shanghai is a large furniture area. I've been to each of those major cities along the East Coast. I actually will return this June. I'll be going to Qingdao for the American Hardwood Export Council, which is in the north of between Beijing and China, or Shanghai. And then there's the Silverwood Trade Show in Shanghai that I'll be attending. This will be my first time back to China in 4 or 5 years, so I'm looking forward to seeing what has really changed in those years. But the volumes of China that they're buying, we can clearly show now that it's not that furniture is coming back to the United States or to Europe. It's actually being consumed by the emerging middle class there. We also have documentation that's showing some of the furniture that did go to China, American furniture that went to China for production, is actually what's driving the market now in Mexico. And that back in 2000 to 2008, the shipping costs were very, very low to China. And so now the shipping cost for our lumber is equivalent to any other product, and the ships are full going to China. So we compete for space on those ships. So those markets are shifting to Mexico. Mexico historically could not buy quality lumber from Pennsylvania because the shipping costs from Pennsylvania were 2 or 3 times more than what is coming from Mississippi, Kentucky, and southern states. Now our major growth is in Mexico, and we see that that's where much of the furniture that's being shipped back to the United States is coming from Mexico.
how fragile is a business relationship? You said 40% of our exports of hardwoods are going to China, 25% to Canada, as I recall, and 10% to Mexico.
Correct.
Given the geopolitical realities that we have in the world today, whether it's the South China Sea or North Korea or Chinese aircraft carriers, I don't want to go far afield here, but when we are so heavily dependent on that as the marketplace and source for our hardwoods, where does that leave us? Whether an administration steps in with tariffs and duties, it's not hard to go up from 0%, which is where we're at in some cases with furniture, to ending up in a scenario where it's cut off simply because we decide there's going to be sanctions because of some mischief geopolitically in the world. How are we looking to diversify, and how cognizant is the industry of the reality that we're not trading with Great Britain or Germany here? This trade is going on with Communist China.
It's very much a concern of our industry, and I'm very concerned because I know of many mills that have put all of their eggs in one basket and are shipping 40, 60% of their production to a particular market. And that is a concern as we see the potential and various tariffs, if they are imposed, it would have devastating impact on our industry. And the reality is that the forest products industry was very quick to adjust to the global market. And unfortunately, it did take many of our jobs in furniture production. We went from 90,000 jobs in 2000 to 60,000 jobs in the forest products industry. Recognizing when I refer to the forest products industry, I'm looking at forestry, primary processing of the sawmills, secondary processing of the furniture mills, paper, and all the secondary products as well, flooring, what have you. So all of that combined is where that 60,000 jobs are. It's very much a concern for us in the future. In the meantime, we're looking at new products, new markets, looking at other. India is a potential new market for us that is projected to be something similar to what's going on in China with the population that they have. The Middle East is a growing market for us, as well as new products. The cross-laminated timber, which can use soft maple and poplar as well as other species for high-rise tall buildings, is a new market for us, as well as the thermally modified lumber. That's a product that is extremely popular in Europe, but it's kiln-dried lumber that is super heat-treated and can then allow our American species of hardwood to be used for outdoor applications, such as decking and cladding on the exterior of homes. So we're looking at new markets to be able to provide alternatives, but if anything happens in the international markets, especially in those three areas, it will drastically impact our industry, and there will be a time of recession, clearly.
30-second comment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your patience, and then I close. For the reasons you've articulated and many others encouraging domestic manufacture here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we ought to be robustly incentivizing the purchase, the manufacture in Pennsylvania of our hardwoods here. I think it insulates us against geopolitical realities worldwide, and it makes perfect sense. I drive through central Pennsylvania, and I see a lot of towns that are yearning for jobs and opportunities. And just a few feet adjacent to them is the hardwoods that could provide those opportunities for people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Gillen. I want to thank everybody who participated today. It's been a great discussion on a number of issues, and it's very helpful for us as policymakers as we move forward to try to tackle a number of these issues. Several times today, the Green Ribbon Task Force has been mentioned, and I don't want anybody to think that those issues haven't been being worked on even prior to today. In fact, some of those recommendations have been enacted. The tax exemption for logger equipment was enacted last year. We looked at the recommendation to increase the payment in lieu of taxes on state land that helps communities that host that land, and that will take effect on DCNR forest land July 1st of this year, so that's very helpful. We're looking at legislation that Chairman Pashinsky has sponsored dealing with noxious weeds that can be beneficial to the forest products industry. So we're looking at a number of different things. Representative Rapp is looking at legislation that would enable the state to sign a good neighbor agreement with the National National Forest Service. So a lot of these things are a work in progress, but I think we're making progress, all with the goal of supporting the forest products industry in Pennsylvania. So I thank you all very much, and I know the members are looking forward to the tour that we're going to take this afternoon on the Bradford City Water Authority property and look at the management, the active management of that forest. So thank you all very much for participating, and this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.